So good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, because we have international participants as well. Welcome to the Michigan OER Summit. This is the fourth year that we are doing this event. My name is Regina Gong. I am the OER and Student Success Librarian at Michigan State University. And I am also the chair of the Michigan OER Network Steering Committee and taking the lead in the program planning committee. So before we officially start our event, our two-day event, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral land of the Three Fires Confederacy and the sacred lands of the indigenous peoples and their continued presence. And while we meet today in a virtual platform, I hope that we acknowledge the importance of the lands that we each call our home and the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. With this land acknowledgement, I hope we can take action to support our indigenous organizations and communities by donating your time and/or money. So as I mentioned earlier, this is our fourth year that we are doing the Michigan OER Summit. But this year marks the first of many things. And I wrote it down so I don't forget about it. So first of all, this is the first time that we are doing it in a virtual platform. So we have been doing it the past 3 years face-to-face with community colleges hosting the event every year. But as you know, because of COVID-19 and the move to virtual conferences, we are doing this year as a virtual summit. So that is a first for us. And second, this is the first time that the Michigan OER Network is sponsoring this event. The Michigan OER Network is a community of practice among higher ed institutions and K-12 to promote, support, and advocate the use of OER in all the different sectors of education here in Michigan. And third, it is the first time that we are partnering with the Michigan Higher Education Compact, or MEC, to mount this virtual conference. So MEC was instrumental in convening the Michigan OER network. So actually in convening the 12 member states back in November 2018 to think of ways in which we all can accelerate OER in our respective states. And the Michigan OER Network is the project that we have in our state of Michigan to accomplish that. So thank you to our partners at MEC, Jenny Parks, Katie Schock, and Annie Kameni, who helped us mount this virtual summit. And let me see. Lastly, because this event is free and held virtually, we are able to attract a lot of people outside of Michigan, to attend this event. In fact, 10 minutes ago, I looked at the attendees, and we have 597 who registered for this event, more than half of which are outside of Michigan, and we have international attendees too. So thank you for taking the time to attend this summit. And lastly, there's really a lot of folks that I want to thank. So I just want to thank our sponsors, as I've mentioned, MEC, for the conference management and event logistics of this conference. We would like to thank my institution, MSU Libraries, for sponsoring our keynote speakers. And of course, the My OER Network Steering Committee, you are all here. I'm saying hello to all of you. And the Program Planning Committee, who spent so many hours virtual meeting, so that we can all come up with the best conference experience for you all. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all. I know there's a lot of things going on in our lives. It's the height of summer, but you are here attending this event. So I hope these 2 days will be 2 days of learning, of inspiration, of insights that you all can take as you return back in your respective work on campus. So that's it. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. We have a lot of fabulous, awesome presentations that you can attend. And we also have a student panel later in the afternoon, where we will have student leaders from MSU talking about student advocacy. And don't forget to attend the wrap up for today as well. So, and then tomorrow we will have day 2 of the summit, where we will have another keynote speaker and a whole slate of presentations for you all. And lastly, tomorrow we also have the wrap up and raffle. So please do attend. And yeah, for lunch, we also have lunch and learn, where you can network, where you can meet folks who you would like to talk about your OER programs. Okay, so that's a lot. That's a lot. We are getting into the top of the hour. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Angela DeBarger, who is the program officer at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So I think Katie will paste something in the chat so you can read more about Angela's work at the Hewlett Foundation. But really, I would just like to tell a story of how I came to know Angela. So I know that I met Angela in one of the Open Ed conferences that I've attended in the past. I'm not sure if it was Richmond or Anaheim, but I met her there and I sat beside her during lunch. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, you just came on board the Hewlett Foundation at the time, Angela, and so you were really wanting to meet a lot of the OER advocates and folks who are working in the open. So I introduced myself to her, and we talk about our experiences, our background, and how we came into the open. And I remember I was so awed by a lot of similarities between us, because she also went to Michigan, right? U of M for her master's. And she has worked with a few folks at Michigan State University in her past job. And from then on, we really have become, supportive colleagues and friend. And she really, what I admire the most about Angela is that she is not only supportive of the work that we do, so librarians, right? But she is also keen on hearing the issues that is happening on the ground, because we are closer to, implementing, right, our OER initiatives on campus. She really wants to learn a lot about what we are finding as challenges and as opportunities, so that she can help us better as she works with in her work at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So we are in for a treat today with her talk about transgressing boundaries. And I hope, her talk will spark a lot of inspiration and questions and aha moments. And if you have that, please put that in the chat. So we are going to have a Q&A at the end of her presentation. So I'll read your questions in the chat and we'll start that conversation. So without further ado, I welcome Angela. And by the way, I forgot, I just saw Angela like 10 days ago, right? In Stanford. So it's really nice that you are here with us now. And yeah, let's hear it.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Regina. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you, Regina. It's really such an honor to be here, to be part of the Michigan OER Summit. And I especially like the theme of this summit, building bridges to open up education. I like it for so many reasons, and it seems especially relevant now as we're coming back to school and schools are opening up again. And today is actually my son's first day back to high school after being remote all of last year. So it's his junior year, a big transition, and I'm a little anxious, but also excited. And I think for those of us who are educators and who work in education, many of us are wondering what going back is going to look like and feel like this year. And how do we go back without reverting back to what was before, now that we've witnessed inequities and injustices in a much more tangible way than maybe we had realized. Opening up can't be just about going back. It has to be about bridging to something new. And like the first day of school, crossing these new bridges can be exciting and scary too. And actually, this is how I feel almost anytime I literally cross a bridge. My last job, I had to cross the Golden Gate to get to work. And my commute was like 50 miles each way, which I wasn't too jazzed about. But it felt special to be able to cross this landmark and to catch glimpses of sunrises and sunsets on my way to and from work. But I could also never shake that twinge of fear that I felt, being so high above the water, the traffic moving really fast in these lanes that are so close together. And then the thought that pops into my mind, what if there's an earthquake? But I mostly tried to focus on the beauty, and then my fear would shift to more of a sense of daring and adventure. And so I sometimes think about, when is it worth taking the risk to cross a bridge? And which bridges am I willing to cross? Like, I'm not sure what it would take to get me to cross this bridge. One of my dad's mantras is, if it looks unsafe, it is unsafe. And this isn't water I'd want to be swimming in, so I'd be taking a hard look at how stable those wood planks are before setting forth across this one. And this one's quite high up, but it looks like those other people made it across all right, so I'd probably feel okay about crossing it. And it also depends on what I get when I make it across. What will I see or experience? If it's super scary to be on the bridge, will it be worth it to manage my fear to get to the other side? Or will I need extra supports like encouragement from my family and friends to feel safe? And bringing this back to our work in education, young people and students have to cross bridges all the time. In a physical sense, moving from home to school, from class to class. These can be emotional transitions too, because these spaces feel different. How students are able to show up and reveal themselves and who they are may be different. So educators, family, community play an important role as guides in creating an environment that allows students to explore and connect and find their passions. And this makes me think about what Bell Hooks wrote about in her book, Teaching to Transgress. She said, I celebrate teaching that enables transgressions, a movement against and beyond boundaries. It is that movement which makes education the practice of freedom. She talks about how we need to be courageous and willing to transgress rules when they limit our potential or the potential of others to connect in meaningful ways. She talks about transgressing boundaries to bridge academic and experiential ways of knowing and learning, and finding our passion in experience, the learning that happens through feeling or even suffering. And she believed that learning is a place where paradise can be created when we collectively imagine ways to move beyond boundaries. When I think about opening up education and open education, I think about transgressing boundaries to allow students to realize greater connection, more authentic ways of learning and being, and relationships that extend to knowing each other as people, what's in our minds and also in our hearts. And if we're being honest, this is not being realized in most classrooms today. Some might go so far as, or some might say that these connections are not being made because we're distracted by false hopes that alienate us from each other rather than bring us close together. Jeff Duncan Andrade, who's a scholar and educator whose work I really appreciate, would go so far as to say there's been an assault on hope. We're distracted by these false hopes. He talks about the prevalence of hokey hope, the notion that if youth and students just work hard enough and follow the rules, they can be successful in college and live the American dream. And of course, hard work matters, but this kind of hope ignores the many inequalities that youth have to navigate before they get to school, and the inequities in resources and supports in their school. And this kind of false hope can show up in the form of standardized and impersonalized approaches to curriculum, instruction, and assessment, with the idea that good students are the ones who are able to contort and prevail through. Or a mythical hope, like the idea that racism is ended because of a policy change or a particular leader has been elected. In reality, a single event in and of itself cannot undo systemic inequities. Or sometimes we see events and individuals used to perpetuate a myth of meritocracy, focusing on individual exceptions, but at the same time denying the realities of those who've been oppressed and excluded. And then there's hope deferred, the notion that there's some possibility of future success for students, but leaving them on their own to figure it out. So hope's deferred when there's a gap between students' most pressing needs and the educational opportunities that may be available, and no support to bridge that gap. I'd add to this notion of false hopes that fears can also get in the way of connecting with others. For example, fears of engaging with different understandings and ways of knowing. Our beliefs, our principles, our worldviews are deeply rooted, so much so that we may be unaware. In our schools and our families, certain ways of knowing and explaining are privileged more than others. What information we share, how much we share, and the words that we use. We learn that in making arguments, certain things count as data and evidence and others don't. We learn that certain kinds of stories are considered compelling, worth retelling or telling and retelling, and others aren't. And so then someone comes along with a very different notion or way of thinking that can be scary and unsettling for some. And related to this, I think, is a fear of digging deep to being vulnerable to truly understanding ourselves. Why do we make the choices we make? Why might certain things trigger anger and resentment? We're often taught to ignore these feelings and push through. But I think when we let these fears and false hopes lead, we're not going to experience freedom through education. So how do we create classrooms where it's possible to connect in these ways, to honor cultures and identities, to make space and time for different ways of working and being together? How do we create a culture of connection, growth, and reflection in our schools? I do believe the work of educators is to create the space and possibility for real hope and change, realizing what Duncan Andrade calls critical hope, which is an active commitment to removing inequities and addressing feelings of hopelessness and despair, to restore students' sense of hope. And this can really take many forms. In her book on culturally responsive teaching in the brain, Zaretta Hammond talks about the importance of paying attention to deep culture. And she discusses how culture operates on multiple levels. There's the surface level, an intermediate or shallow level, and a deep level. And it's represented in this image of a culture tree. So at the surface level, we see things like holidays, songs, and food. And the next layer down, the shallow layers, where we find some unspoken rules. These are things like concepts of time and ways of handling emotion, theories of wellness and disease. And then at the deep culture level is where the collective and unconscious beliefs and norms reside. Notions of fairness, concepts of self, spirituality, worldviews. And I really love how she talks about deep culture as embedded in the root system. It's what grounds us, it's what nourishes us, and it's intensely connected with emotions and trust. So when we create the space for deep culture, it's going to go beyond swapping images and text and word problems and case studies. It's about creating the space to learn about each other's lives and experiences, to foster and sustain multiculturalism and multilingualism. And connecting this back to hope, I think when students are given opportunities to make connections between what they're learning in school and in their lives, they're going to feel a sense of control and hopefulness because they're developing the resources to deal with what they're encountering in their lives. Hope also comes when we take the time to really interrogate ourselves as humans, whether we're educators or students, and to take a close look at our lives, our beliefs, our actions, and find a path forward. And these kinds of trusting relationships give us hope in ourselves and hope in each other that we can be successful. Brené Brown talks a lot about this in terms of vulnerability. She says vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, and joy. Vulnerability is about paying attention, not just to what we're thinking, but what we're feeling. Noticing that twinge of resentment or the wave of anxiety and being curious about it. Taking the time to ask ourselves what we need and having honest conversations with each other about what we're experiencing. The vulnerability creates the space for difficult conversations. It opens the door to more collaborative problem solving, more ethical decision making, really be more adaptable to change. I think related to this, there's an element that has to do with standing in solidarity with communities and with learners in collective work to challenge problematic ideas or policies, practices. As educators, we're preparing students as leaders, but we're not leaving them on their own to create change. We're not leaving them on their own to manage the pain and struggle. We're not leaving them on their own to heal. Restoring hope is about struggling and healing together. So when I think about this vision for a better future, isn't this the core of the work that we're doing in open education and why we're all working in open education? Our work is about being in conversation and sharing with each other, co-constructing and learning together, increasing access to knowledge and different ways of knowing. Open education is a bridge to enable better teaching and learning, whether that's around educational affordability and achievement for students, or changing policies and practices to create a more responsive and a more caring infrastructure in our education systems. And it can be transformational, especially if our efforts center around learners who've been marginalized. Make sure that their lived experiences, their aspirations are driving how learning happens. Let's be clear, I don't think open education is the only solution or the only way to do this work. But open educational resources and practices are several of many tools that we might use. And I believe open education helps us navigate these fears and boundaries. It opens us up to letting students drive the learning, to developing stronger connections across disciplines and among institutions to better serve students, and to find opportunities to learn from communities whose expertise and lived experience can help us expand our own ways of knowing and doing. And what's so great about open education is there are multiple pathways to get there. There's not just one kind of bridge or one way to move forward. So I want to share a few examples of what I mean by that. Let's take the multiple literacies and project-based learning effort to start. Now, this collaboration was homegrown in Michigan, a partnership between educators and researchers from Michigan State University, Create for STEM Institute, the University of Michigan, and teachers throughout the state. It's really a wonderful team that brings together experts in science education, literacy, learning technologies to develop a new approach for elementary science. So for those of you who don't work in K-12 science education, within the past year, there's been a significant shift in how the science education community has been thinking about what matters in teaching and learning. It's not just about memorizing the steps of the scientific method and facts about biology, physics, and chemistry. This new approach is about engaging students in authentic science practices, like developing models that explain phenomena and using evidence to create arguments. It's about learning how to apply and integrate core ideas with core practices to make meaning about the world, even for, and especially for, the youngest learners who naturally come to school curious about how things work. Now, still, the multiple literacies and project-based learning team had their work cut out for them. Because for one, not a lot of science is taught in elementary school. English language arts and mathematics get top billing. And elementary school teachers, as you know, have their hands full with covering multiple disciplines. And the team recognized this, and so they chose an approach that integrated opportunities for learning about literacy and mathematics in the context of science. And as a project-based approach, every unit is centered around questions that the kids would find interesting and relevant. So for third graders, they explore questions like, why do I see so many squirrels, but I can't find any stegosauruses? And how can we help the birds near our school grow up and thrive? I sat in on some of the early design meetings with the team, and it really wasn't easy to do this bridging. There are really interesting and sometimes tense debates about what's driving a unit, the science or the literacy, and which kinds of driving questions are going to be interesting to students and also engage them in learning the core ideas and practices that are appropriate for their grade level. And there were important conversations about how to refine the projects, how to collaborate in meaningful ways with teachers who were piloting pretty drafty units and wanting to make sure that they're fully supported and also that their feedback helped to inform revisions. That was complicated, but the team figured it out. And I'm happy to share that these units are now available as OER through Lucas Education Research. And research from an efficacy study showed that students in these project-based learning classes perform better on science assessments than students in a comparison condition, and they grew more in the areas of reflection and collaboration. It's really exciting to see how far this has come because of the team's ability to figure out how to collaborate, their willingness and skill to find new ways to make connections and create new ways to teach and learn science, and to really build on students' identities as curious, competent sense makers in our world. This is the kind of learning that we hope for students across the spectrum, and it really should be possible across disciplines, across grades, and learning contexts. So let's talk for a minute about college and college courses, and especially those general education and introductory courses. These classes don't need to be performative gatekeepers for students. They could be spaces for students to deeply explore who they are as learners, as people, as members of their communities. This is something that OpenStax has been thinking about. As many of you know, OpenStax is known for their open textbooks. And cumulatively, since 2012, they've saved students over $1 billion. It's amazing. And while they've had a significant impact in reaching students, they want to have more of an impact on students' learning experiences. So in the past couple of years, they've become much more intentional about who they're recruiting as authors and how content reflects multiple perspectives. And in their latest development efforts, they're intentionally collaborating with authors of color, looking to their expertise to create the structure and content for their courses. They recognize that for too long, textbooks have failed at taking up questions around culture, language, identity in ways that are really meaningful for students. And again, this has to go beyond representation of culture in surface ways, like changing names, pictures, or case studies. They're trying to find ways that culture, language, and identity can be a part of an exchange with students that's affirming and sustaining. And one of the new OpenStax books that I'm most excited about is English Composition. And the lead authors for this book are Dr. Michelle Robinson, who's director of Spelman College's Writing Center, and Dr. Maria Jersky at LaGuardia Community College. And so in this course, students are going to learn about different literary genres inspired by culturally diverse writers, poets, artists, and researchers like Bell Hooks and Ta-Nehisi Coates. And drawing from these authors' works, The course is going to explore cultural understanding and empathy as a rhetorical strategy. Students are going to be asked to reflect on questions like, who are you? What ideas and experiences do you bring? And how can you join and expand the discourse community? And one of the student projects will be inviting them to write their memoirs, where their lived experience becomes part of the course. So in my mind, this approach to English composition reflects real hope with open education by showing how it's possible to address academically rigorous pedagogy in students' realities. And it opens the door for students and their teachers to examine their lives, to examine the joys and pains and learn from these experiences and move forward together. We also know this kind of approach to teaching and working with students takes practice. Not everyone's going to be immediately comfortable with opening up and being vulnerable or creating space for real conversations about race and identity. So we need to support each other in learning how to do this. This is why I'm particularly encouraged by the work that the College of the Canyons and Community College Consortium for OER are leading. They've developed a program called Open for Anti-Racism for faculty across California's community colleges. They were realizing that while many institutions were calling for change and adding equity in their strategic plans, these were not necessarily translating into teaching practices that affect students' learning experiences. And they also didn't see that there were many opportunities to explore systemic racism through an open education lens, or look deeply into anti-racist teaching with support from peers and experts in the field. So they developed a 4-week course, which is actually more like a workshop, for faculty to explore how OER and open pedagogy can be tools for anti-racist classroom practices. And they included faculty from institutions across the state working in different disciplines and different roles. And in this community, the participants have access to peer coaching or peer support and coaching, monthly webinars to hear from experts on anti-racist pedagogy and research on structural barriers to equitable learning. And while the educators taking the course were learning how to authentically address issues of race and culture, I think it was also a learning opportunity for the speakers that they brought in too, about the ways that open educational resources and practices can be a vehicle for more equitable instruction. As a culminating part of the experience, faculty developed action plans to share what they're learning in their communities, and they found different and creative ways to connect with their learning to their particular context. So one faculty member committed to sharing what he learned during his English department meetings. A biology department coordinator decided to implement changes across 21 sections, which is going to impact around 600 students. And another educator added anti-racist and open pedagogy perspectives to their college's OER grant programs for the fall. So if you want to learn more, I'd check out the link that I shared here on the slide. The team really put together a great video that explains more about the experience. And there's some reflections from faculty that I found really moving. I wanted to share a couple of the quotations with you. Sharon Sampson, who's an assistant professor at Grossman College, said, "I know there's more work to be done, and it has improved my knowledge, given me a louder voice to be able to move and be more intentional in this work." And Robert Brown, who's an English professor at San Bernardino College, said, "I'm using more of students' voice in class so that not only can they see themselves represented in the authors that I'm choosing, but they become the authors. It's a writing class. I need to let them know that they are the writers that other people can see." I'm really excited that there's a growing number of faculty and institutions who are exploring these intersections between culturally sustaining practices and open educational resources and practices. But we can't wait till college for this work to begin. A college English class shouldn't be the first time that students have the experience of having these kinds of conversations. I believe we can prepare teachers for this work so that students from the earliest grades are experiencing culturally responsive and sustaining education. And Branch Alliance for Educator Diversity, or Branch Ed for short, is working on just this. Their focus is on growing and improving educator preparation programs so that more teachers and teachers of color are ready to engage their increasingly diverse student bodies. And through their partnerships with teacher prep programs at historically Black colleges and universities, their approach centers on several areas. They begin with establishing a community of learners that shares responsibility for the teacher candidates' learning and collaboration. They take a practice-based approach so that teachers in their program develop skills to integrate and apply culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, coherent instructional and assessment practices, and effective use of data. And now, as part of their core work, teachers in the program are learning about how to find, create, and implement high quality, more culturally relevant OER. Now, adding this work on OER is new for the team at BranchEd. And as they reflected on the challenges they observed when it comes to equitable and inclusive practices with OER and teacher prep programs specifically, they realized it's not just lack of awareness about OER among teacher educators that's a problem. There's also the problem of the lack of diversity of content creators and curators, which contributes to the limited availability of culturally relevant content. And it limits teachers' ability to facilitate conversations about race, culture, and identity. So one of the outcomes of their newest efforts will be OER course modules that can be used by educator preparation programs. And these modules will focus on culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, inclusive pedagogy. They're also developing resources to help teachers curate and evaluate the quality of OER along these dimensions. So my hope is that when teachers graduate from this program, they're able to join schools that really appreciate and support their efforts in how they're creating and using OER. So I suppose my point is I hope that the school context also matters. And while equity and inclusion may be possible to achieve with OER in a classroom over time, this work is going to be difficult for teachers to sustain if their school's policies and practices are also not aligned and supportive of equitable teaching and learning. And this would be true across the spectrum from K-12 to higher ed. So I want to share one more story about what it takes to build school or institutional capacity for this work. And there are actually a lot of examples to draw on for what this work could look like, but I want to shine a light on the leadership of historically Black colleges and universities here. So for at least the past 4 years, the HBCU community has been building the organizational, programmatic, and technical foundation for OER among their colleges. And in this time, over 20 HBCUs have joined the community. This community has been meeting each year at an HBCU OER summit, coordinated along with the Online Learning Consortium annual meetings. And these convenings have been important opportunities to share about efforts underway at different institutions. And I had the opportunity to attend a couple of years ago, and one session that stood out for me was a presentation of findings from some action research that 2 women science faculty at Bethune-Cookman University had been leading. And they were sharing about the positive impact of using OER on learning outcomes and experiences for their students in general science education courses. And while these annual meetings were helpful, the community knew that more was needed to activate the leadership and support for OER at their institutions. So now Dr. Robbie Melton, who's at Tennessee State University, her colleagues at other HBCUs are working to develop an ambitious vision to create a more collaborative, more supportive infrastructure for expanding and sustaining OER within and across their institutions. It's really a multifaceted approach. They began with conversations with the leadership at their institutions at the level of the president's office to make sure there was support from the administration. And the next step was to create regional hubs so that institutions that are a little further along in their work can support planning and professional development for other institutions to implement their own OER programs. And within each institution, a key element of their strategy is building bridges between different campus stakeholder groups. So part of the role of campus coordinators is learning about what each stakeholder group needs to understand about OER to be able to support this work. In addition to these elements, they're working to develop culturally contextualized OER for the HBCUs and the broader higher education community, and specifically content for Africana, African American, and Black studies programs. They're going to work collaboratively to develop a taxonomy for the cultural collection, create and identify existing content and resources, and also develop faculty capacity to create and add additional resources. So I think we can learn a lot from this work of the HBCUs, the patience in building community around open education, and then using that momentum to build a stronger, sustainable infrastructure to support OER creation and use. So as we look across these stories, we see different ways that people have transgressed boundaries to come together to create something better than before. And open education was a key part of that. With multiple literacies and project-based learning, teams from different institutions with different content expertise and also different experiences working in education came together to develop a new way to engage young learners in science. They designed an approach that makes it possible for elementary teachers to actually teach science while also building foundational literacy and math skills. And because these materials are OER, teachers can further customize them to engage and connect with students' interests. With OpenStack's new approach, we're witnessing an important shift from textbooks reifying a transmission model of learning where students memorize stuff from books and lectures to a new reality where open textbooks create opportunities for students to experience learning as affirming and validating their identities and lived experiences. And as educators explore these new directions, Open for Anti-Racism creates a space for faculty to reflect on their current practices in their classrooms, find ways to use open educational resources and practices to challenge the status quo, to more authentically connect with students. And importantly, taking these steps as part of a supportive learning community who can provide encouragement and guidance. And K-12 teachers benefit from these kinds of experiences too. And so with Branch Ed, we see a different model for teacher education, actually really different from most current approaches where teachers, if they're lucky, learn about OER after they've been in the classroom for some time, to an approach where teachers from their earliest days and years in the profession have an opportunity to discover and create culturally relevant OER. And then the HBCU network gives us a window into what it looks like to activate schools and systems around this work, where open education initiatives are centered on the needs and interests of Black scholars and students from their leadership and from their leadership in learning about how institutions create bridges to support each other in developing the infrastructure for new OER initiatives and new open content that's lifting up and recognizing Black experiences. But we should celebrate the outcomes of each of these teams and organizations with what they've accomplished through their work. And at the same time, I want to make the point that it's not just the outcome or endpoint that matters. The journey and the process from getting from here to there is just as important. What it looks like and feels like to do this work matters too. At the start of the session, I showed some pictures of different bridges, and we talked about how with some we might feel a sense of daring and adventure when we cross, and others may seem just too dangerous to take the risk to cross. Maybe there's the other extreme, like some may be so dull and boring, we cross to get from here to there, but the experience is so unremarkable we don't even notice it. So the journey matters, especially in the work we're doing as educators, when we're actively committing to remove inequities, address feelings of hopelessness that students may be experiencing, when we're creating opportunities for students to make connections between what they're learning in school and in their lives, when we're creating the space for each other to take a close look at our lives, our beliefs, our actions, to acknowledge pain and difficulty and find a path forward together. This isn't something that can be done automatically on autopilot or authentically on autopilot. It requires intentionality in creating experiences that we're drawn to, where everyone has a voice, and intentionality in inviting opportunities to unearth deep culture. It matters how we're feeling when we're doing this work. Do we feel supported, cared for, loved even when we're trying to get to where we're going? And it takes many of us, particularly those of us who've embraced academia as part of our identities, to figure out when and how to shed some of the unproductive layers and habits we've built up to shelter ourselves from the harms and even abuses we've encountered in our journeys to get to where we are today. These protective layers can sometimes limit our own hopes, limit our ability to find freedom through education. So how do we walk our talk? What's this going to look like for each of us to create a new and better reality where we're transgressing boundaries to open up education? I suppose we can start by thinking about what's on the other side of that bridge for each of us. Where do we want to get to with our communities? And in the ways we can, given the tools we have today. And that's probably going to look a little differently for each of us. People ask me this kind of question all the time, and it actually seems more frequent these days now that I'm 4 years into my 8-year term as a program officer at Hewlett. They ask, what do you want to accomplish with the open education strategy during your time at the foundation? So I say things like, I want open education programs to be the shining examples of what equitable and inclusive instruction looks like so that students feel empowered through school. I want schools and institutions to resource and support open educational policies, resources, practices, and research. And I want to see growing evidence of learning and sharing about what effective open practices look like from communities around the world. Again, how we get there matters to me. Do students feel a greater connection to each other, to their teachers? Do the people I work with feel heard, supported, and appreciated? And do we have fun learning together? Do we help each other better understand ourselves? I believe this work we're trying to do with open educational resources and practices is about creating a culture that values learning, care, and relationships as much or more than metrics. And so in the classroom setting, this might mean creating space for students to share their stories, finding as many ways as possible to listen to students, getting to know their histories and finding ways to connect with these, and leveraging their expertise to shape the learning experience. At an institution or school level, this could look like creating learning communities that enable educators to get to know students, to collaborate with each other, engage in shared decision-making around teaching and learning, and incorporate policies to ensure teachers receive compensation and recognition for the time they're taking to create and customize open educational resources and practices. And then there's the role for system leaders and administrators too, in creating learning communities like we saw with the HBCUs and we see in this Michigan OER network. It offers support for learning and sharing within and across systems, and coordination when it comes to creating more inclusive policies and practices. In order for educators to do the work they want to do, to change teaching and learning with open educational resources and practices, they need support from their schools and leadership in terms of recognizing their labor, supporting coordination, and creating the space for opportunities to continue their own learning. So I wonder what this looks like for you in each of your communities. And I invite you to take a moment to think about it. What boundaries do you want to, or do you need to transgress and transcend to realize your vision for your work in open education? And what risks are involved for you and for others? And how can you help each other manage and navigate these risks? And because you don't just have to leap from here to there, what might some small steps forward look like in how you connect with students, with colleagues, with each other in your work, and even starting now at this summit? I have a lot of faith in this group and in each of you. And I truly believe you're going to be successful in what you set out to do. And I want to end with a poem that says it even better than I can. It's called A Gift. We have changed each other, invited each of us more fully present, more completely human, more alive, opened new worlds outside, within, and filled each to some brim, some new capacity we'd not have known was there. We're surprised by life that we have found together. Courage and pain lived in each other's presence. Webs of heart muscle we've woven from our lives, alike and different. So we become a gift to one another and ourselves. Thank you for this opportunity to share a few words with you today. And I think we'll have some time for Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela, for that wonderful and thought-provoking presentation. You know, folks, like your question about how do we begin to transgress and transcend the boundaries as we work in open education, it's really something that I have to think personally, right? And really have to grapple with, because, you know, it's hard and it's different, right? Because we all operate in different contexts. So we have a few questions here, Angela, and I'd like, I'd love for you to address some of them. So we have one here, and it says, we have noticed a long time ago that people, especially young people, like to connect in a community and feel safe, important, meaningful, if they belong to something that interests them or where they can meet people similar to themselves. Combined with modern technologies used by the current young generation, this creates an ideal opportunity to smuggle valuable knowledge into young people in a relaxed atmosphere. What do you think? Do you have similar experiences, especially in the age of distance learning caused by a pandemic? Is equitable access to education not even more necessary in these times?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And there's a lot baked into that, that question there, but I completely agree that equitable education is it's always been important in the pandemic and with remote learning and what we've witnessed, what inequities look like up close and personal, that were maybe already there, but now even more visible to all of us. And so I completely agree that creating those opportunities and the space to learn about each other, to connect with each other, to give students the time to share what's on their minds and what they're living, and ideally connect that back to what's happening in the classroom too, but maybe not always. Maybe there's some times where those conversations just need to focus on what's on their mind today and how to manage those experiences. I know there was a lot in that question, Regina. If there's something I missed.
I know there's a lot of things in that question. So maybe we can address some of that in the questions.
Okay.
Too. So Mitch Kota asked, how would you address educators who resist the idea that meritocracy is a myth?
It's a great question. I think, it's evident to, in terms of, I think, looking at where are the real opportunities for all students to learn and engage in school right now. And I think there's evidence showing that it's not equal, it's not equitable. So I think drawing on those kinds of data, I think can be really powerful. I also think creating opportunities for conversations about this. Not everyone's going to shift based on looking at a research study or reading a book.
Yeah.
I think creating the space for conversations with each other where we can each share our experiences and our truths, and be open to listening to that, I think could be another way to move forward.
Yeah, and I really agree with you on that. So, the listening portion, especially, because I think a lot, part of what we are experiencing now is people refusing to listen, right? And so I think it starts with the listening, and the dialogue can stem from there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Karen, hey Karen, how are you? I am wondering about all of the ways that traditional academic architecture and structures stand in the way of changes that we want to make. How can we have a greater influence on top-level administrators or boards that stand in our way?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question too, and really important. What's wonderful about open education is that a lot of the initial work really was grassroots, like led by faculty, who wanted to try something new and do something different with their students. And sort of through that initial work, like communities formed and it grew and evolved over time. But at the same time, I think, as I talked about, and as this question surfaces, we really need to engage the leadership in this too. And so I shared the example of like what the HBCUs are doing around that, which is sometimes like direct conversations with the president's office, but there are multiple ways. I think, this Michigan OER network is one where it's an opportunity for leaders at institutions to listen in and learn about the possibilities for open education. The work that MEC leads around convening policymakers and institution leaders and creating opportunities to learn about open education through those convenings are really powerful. There are other groups like the Doers, and I apologize, I'm gonna forget like that the acronym stands for like in this moment, but they're a group of state education leaders who are committed to figuring out how to integrate OER in their systems. And so they're working collaboratively, and actually just recently, yesterday, published a piece or Inside Higher Ed published some of their work around ways that OER can be considered for recognition and tenure and promotion.
Yeah. Yes, and also to add to that, the work of MEC you mentioned, and also the work of the other
the regional compacts.
Regional compacts.
Yes,
right?
The four of them. Yeah, yeah. I mean
they're all like acronyms. So SREB, WICHI,
yes,
right? And
NEBI, NEBI. Yeah.
NEBI,
yeah. Well, and what's really powerful too about what they're doing, they're each leading work in their region, but they're also working collaboratively and sharing what they're doing to support OER initiatives in their region. So I'm super excited about the regional compacts leadership too.
Yeah. And as I mentioned in my opening, the Michigan OER network is a product of that collaboration, of that work that we did with MEC back in November of 2018. So this is actually a culmination of that project. And I'm really happy that we are able to form this community of practice that bridges, the gap between K-12 community colleges and the four-year universities.
Yes.
So we have another question here from Dan McGuire. What is the most formidable boundary within K-12 to using OER more?
Yeah.
So like challenge probably, right?
Yeah.
He's talking about like what are the challenges?
K-12 is it's interesting because there's actually prevalent use of OER, but lack of awareness of OER. Like the way that curriculum adoption happens in K-12 is through these formal procurement channels. And what educators are often paying attention to is about like, how are the materials really going to advance learning goals and support my students in learning, what I think is important. But the open education OER piece is not necessarily on the radar around that. So I do think we have a bit of our work cut out for us in terms of really making that connection clear about why open educational resources and practices are an even better way to advance those learning goals, because they're materials that are more flexible and customizable, can be more easily personalized, integrated into different kinds of systems. So there's an awareness and the sharing piece around that. I think there's also work to do like with professional learning providers who work in collaboration with districts or district leaders who are in those roles to in those sessions with teachers, really lift up those elements of open education. So it's important, of course, to learn about the disciplinary core ideas and practices in those sessions, but also to find ways to talk about what more is possible because the materials are open.
Yeah. And we'd like to get into all the questions that you have. So we have one again from Nunruddin Merchant. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Thanks, Angela, for an inspiring presentation. What I heard and understood from your presentation is having a deep sense of empathy and care with the learning community. Yes. Really.
Yes.
I was wondering how open education movement supports that beyond just online textbooks creation and provision, and how this sense of connection could be harvested using open education at an institution.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I really do think our work in open education, it goes beyond the open textbooks. It goes beyond or affordability. Those are all like really important goals that we want to accomplish. But I do think there's a vision and way that we work that's more powerful, because it's not just about the resources, it's about open practices. And that I take like a broad lens when I think about that. I think about open practice in terms of the knowledge, learning, and sharing that happens in the classroom among teachers and students, among teachers, and in the research community too, like being open about sharing what you're learning as you go. This is something that's come up in Regina, you're part of the graduate, or you're still part of the graduate OER, global OER, OGN, yes. Like talking about open practice and sharing what you're learning as you're working on your dissertation. It's not just about getting to that end product, it's about like being vulnerable along the way. And that's where I think like the connection, where I see one of the ways that CARE connects in to the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah. And really, I second that, Angela, because, our work in the open and open education transcends, the boundaries of affordability and access, and really now paying attention to how open education can enable open practices so that students can learn better. So, yes. Yeah, and be more empowered. So, yeah, I think we'll take this two questions. How do you believe the attack on critical race theory will impact OER?
Yeah, that's a big one. I've been thinking, I've been thinking a lot about that. And we actually have in the past year have reoriented our open education strategy around racial equity. And we had this very conversation with our board at our meeting a few weeks ago. So I have a few things I can say about that. One, like just acknowledging that our commitment to OER has always been about creating equitable access to learning opportunities for students, and addressing equity and how knowledge and information are shared, and whose voices and perspectives are represented. But we realize if we want to take up equity authentically, we have to pay attention to how race and culture show up in materials. And I mean, in connection to the broader conversation around critical race theory, I think a lot is getting lumped into these policies around the challenges to critical race theory, but like we really need to stay committed and connected to pursuing work where we're attending to how authors from different cultures are represented in materials, that we're creating materials that are honoring the identities, histories, and perspectives of Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous communities, and really, again, inviting students to bring their own lived experiences, histories, and knowledge to shape learning. So, I see that, like, as we take that, I think I see a strong connection between taking up work around culturally responsive and sustaining education and the work that we're trying to do with open education. And that will be a priority for the foundation.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the way you've guided the strategy refresh, with open education to center more on that topic. And so we have about 2 minutes before we end. Let's just address two of library related questions. What one thing do you wish was easier to find support from a library perspective? And another one's from Julia. How does all of this relate to the work of librarians who at the university level don't have regular, consistent access to the students? One thing that I'd recommend too, I probably wouldn't be able to answer all of that, but some of the things that we are able to talk about in our student panel might be something that you'd find inspiration from, Julia. So watch out for that later this afternoon. Yeah. Angela.
One thing that comes to mind, I think maybe more related to the second question, I wonder where there are opportunities for collaboration among faculty and librarians in creating courses and ways that institutions can help facilitate that kind of connection between faculty, librarians, centers for teaching and learning and instructional design. And that might be a way to then do some bridging to like more direct bridging to what's happening in the classroom. And then the first question about what I wish was easier. I'm newer to the library space, I will admit that, but one thing I've come to appreciate about the work of librarians is their systematic and deep understanding about curation and how to structure and organize resources and the integrated systems that are used to support that kind of sharing of knowledge and resources. And I think there's more that we can be doing around integrating some of those practices and approaches to make it easier to find and access OER.
Yes, and surely, there's a lot of us librarians here in this summit. There'll be lots of opportunities for us to have dialogue, conversation. I can offer my perspective too. So yeah, please don't hesitate to contact me or Angela. She has her contact information there. And to Denise, who was asking about the tree, the organizational tree, we are going to make Angela's presentation available so you can all go back to it. And yeah, so just a heads up to everyone, we are now heading to our first concurrent sessions at okay, I am going to be confused the time situation here. It's going to be at 12:10 Eastern time. We are starting with our 6 concurrent sessions. And then after that, we are going to segue to our lunch and network. So please feel free to attend that to meet other folks working in the open. And then we are going to have our second concurrent session for the day. And then we all go back to listen to our student panel, and then we'll wrap up. So it's a busy day. I hope you get the chance to attend, these presentations. And thank you again, Angela, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for everything, for your support and all of that. So
thank you, Regina.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We will see you in a little bit. Bye.
Bye.